All right, here we go. All right, thanks guys for being here. This is being recorded and it will be available on our YouTube channel after it's uploaded. So that should probably be tomorrow. I am going to just make this informative and as quick as possible. This is going to be an overview on Adrenal Health 101. So whether you know what your adrenals are or not, and whether you know if they're an issue or not, I want to make this really easy for everyone to understand. And my goal tonight is to just show you the most simple way to support your health and all of the different areas of health that we're going to be talking about tonight. So who am I? My name is Sarah Jo Poff. I am the main person behind Healthy Families for God, which was started over a decade ago, just with the goal and intention of making sure that we are supporting our bodies and being good steward of our bodies, God's temple, with the things that he's given us in his creation and the wisdom that comes from him. So we're supporting our combining, research and his word for the best guidance for our health. I did go to school, to naturopathy school, and but what I want to say is that tonight, what I'm bringing to you is information that I've learned on my own personal journey, being tired, having 6 kids, and making sure that I support my own health and energy so that I can continue to function after many nights of not really getting any sleep. So what I want to do is just go over tonight, just basic Adrenal Health 101, and then we're going to really narrow it down and we're going to simplify this as much as possible. So let's get started. First of all, this is just for you, those of you who are like, what are my adrenal glands? I don't even know what they are. You may know this already. Many of the people who I share things with already have a lot of awesome knowledge. So some of you know this stuff. But the adrenal glands are really, really important as far as a lot of functions in our body. They're part of the triad or the triangle of our endocrine health. So we've got our reproductive, sex hormones like estrogen and progesterone, and we've got our thyroid, and we've got our adrenals. And so those are all connected. And when one of them goes off, it tends to kind of set a chain of events of things going off in the other areas of the triangle too. So we're going to talk about that a little bit tonight. But some of the roles and things that the adrenal glands do for our health is to really just help support a stress response. The adrenal glands are responsible for producing adrenaline and cortisol. Adrenaline usually comes first and then cortisol follows that. And these are all, of course, linked to our kind of like our underlying foundational hormones like DHEA, which is really important. And we'll talk a little bit about that tonight. DHEA is your fat burning hormone. So if you feel like you're exercising and you're not burning fat, you're not building muscle, what I usually see is it's usually low DHEA, which is inevitable as we age. I'm 43 and I can see it going down in my tests as I age. And as stress happens too, it lowers that as well. Sometimes having adrenals that need some support might show itself in just our sleep patterns and our cortisol schedule that normally would be highest in the morning and then taper off towards the evening. Our immune health, when that is down, when our adrenals are struggling, our immune health is down. And so we'll talk about that too. And then there's so much also that it's connected to our mood and our mental clarity. So that's why brain fog is actually one of the symptoms of our adrenals just not being on like they should. And that also sometimes is headaches. And of course, we know that sometimes when our adrenals are struggling, one of the main things we see is constant fatigue, but then sometimes we'll notice energy in the evenings. So what we call that is wired but tired. So you're like, I know I'm tired, but I'm also wired. And this is sometimes why we see one of the things that come along with it is that we are extremely tired, but we can't fall asleep at night. And so that's another symptom that our adrenals need some support. Sometimes it can be accompanied by low blood pressure because, and that could also be low glucose too, low blood glucose, because what happens is, for all of these things, salt cravings as well, our adrenal glands, one of their jobs is to produce or regulate, I should say, the electrolyte balance in our body through a hormone called aldosterone. And so when our adrenals are struggling, we are also usually not maintaining a proper electrolyte balance. So this is where the salt cravings come in and things like that. So we are going to talk a little bit tonight too about just how important it is to use sodium to support our adrenal glands. And I know that there are some out there who have been told a million times from different sources that sodium is bad and we have to lower it. So if that's you tonight, just take a minute to kind of throw that out the window, because we're going to talk about how desperately we need that to support our adrenal health. Shortness of breath is a little bit overlooked for a symptom of our adrenals needing some support. And we're going to talk about one of the main reasons how that's linked to the adrenals being a little bit off. And we talked about a lowered immune system because of the role that it plays in supporting our immune system. So as you're looking at this list, a lot of us nowadays, and as I've seen in the last 2 years, as I've looked at hormone testing and results, these are actually very much on the increase since 2020. We've seen them very much increase. And so that's why I thought I would do a class tonight and really get into these. The reason, of course, we don't want to live like that. We don't want to constantly have those symptoms, but there are more concerning long-term effects of not addressing adrenal health and letting it go. And you may know somebody, or maybe this is you, where maybe in life, if you do something very active or exciting or stressful, if you have a stressful day or something, like I know somebody who, if we do big outings that are really exciting and stuff, she's literally in bed for 3 days afterwards. That's one of the long-term effects that we really want to make sure we're preventing by supporting our adrenal health before it gets to that point. And sometimes another sign is just really not being able to handle stress. Like the body just completely shuts down. You're tired for days, or a migraine happens every time, or something like that. Noticing that you just can't recover from just the smallest amount of activities. And so, you know, that's just not a good quality of life. So we want to really make sure that we're preventing that, or helping support the body so that it can get out of that mode. I talked about testing. One of the ways that we assess adrenal health is by lab testing. I have these on my website. They can be done at home. So generally it's, we have a bunch of different ones that are blood spot. So you don't have to have a full vial of blood taken. They're just a finger poke and then dropping dots of blood onto a card that comes with it, and then saliva. When we're testing for adrenal health, two of the main things that we want to test for are the DHEA hormone that I talked about, because if that's low, sometimes that will tell us that the body has been producing too much cortisol for too long, and the DHEA is taking a toll on that important hormone. And so sometimes, you know, we can just look at supporting it with DHEA supplementally until we can recover the body all around. We don't necessarily always want to just jump in with that hormone supplementing without knowing. And so that's why we look at these. So another thing about when you're testing adrenal health is that it has to be a 24-hour cortisol test. It has to be 4 saliva tests. You can't just test one time of the day. I know some people, as I've gotten lab tests sent to me over the years, when people go to their doctor, if they are testing cortisol, they're usually only testing it once while the patient is there. But that doesn't give us a picture of the body's overall cortisol response throughout the day, because it should have this nice curve. And if we just see one and we don't see that it's doing this and then it's jumping up in the afternoon or something, or in the evening where it shouldn't, then we don't get the full picture of the adrenal health. So we want to have that saliva collections 4 times a day, the 24-hour cortisol testing, to help us see what that looks like. So we're going to go over tonight just some recovery options and support for the adrenal glands. And of course, what I'm sharing tonight is not just going to help support the adrenal glands. This is when we're doing holistic health, we are making sure that we're supporting the entire body overall. And so these are going to help in all areas of health too. This is obviously going to benefit the thyroid and progesterone and estrogen and energy and immune system and all of that kind of stuff. So a couple of the things we're going to get into more specifically on this list, and then a couple of them we're just going to mention briefly. Before I go on, I know that sometimes it seems overwhelming. And so before we go any farther, I want to say and encourage you, consider, some of you are maybe quite far on your journey and you've already done half of these things, or maybe 3/4 of these things, or something like that. Or maybe you haven't done anything yet. If you haven't, and whether you have or you haven't, I would encourage you to just have maybe 2 takeaways from tonight that you aren't doing and that you could implement this in the next month on a very consistent basis. And then after that, go back and pick 2 more things for the next month, if that helps you make it more practical. Some of these are extremely easy. Some of them are free. I heard you guys in my poll that I took a while back, and you had mentioned a lot had mentioned about just really wanting to make it budget friendly. And so the good news is that a lot of this is free. And some of it might just be a minor shift in what you're already doing. I know for me, I had bought into some of the intermittent fasting things and thinking that it was going to help. And so some of this might be like, wait, that goes against everything I've been hearing and learning. And sometimes that's frustrating and overwhelming. So just take it as you can. This, like I said, this recording will be on the YouTube channel, so you can go back to it when you're ready to implement a couple of more things if you'd like. We're going to just talk about some shifts. We're not going to be like, you have to completely throw away everything in your pantry and your supplement container and this and that. We're going to focus on some minor shifts that you can make. And then we're going to talk about the most important things that I will not go without personally for my adrenal support. So some of those things that we're going to talk about are just some minor dietary shifts. These might be things you're already doing. They might not be. We're really going to focus in on metabolic support, and we're going to talk about why that's important. Like I said, intermittent fasting is not something I would recommend, and we will talk a little bit more about that too. But this basically causes the body that's already stressed, because when the adrenals are not functioning properly, that means the body's been stressed, and we can achieve the same benefits that come with fasting without fasting and without worsening our condition, without worsening our adrenal health. We're going to talk about a few things regarding exercise, some of the most important holistic support with plants and supplements. We're going to talk about diaphragmatic breathing, optimizing hormones, detoxing the home and why that is important. And then of course, sleep support. My goal when I set out in all of this was to be practical. Sometimes we don't get to choose our sleep. We always want to try to prioritize it and make sure that we're doing the best we can with our sleep schedule. It's so very important. But sometimes if you're in a situation like me, where your child has medical needs in the middle of the night, or you've got little ones or something, we don't get to choose that. And so I set out on this journey with all my testing and glucose monitoring and all these things to make sure that there are things that we can do despite that, whether or not we can make that a possibility. Obviously, it's very high priority. So for those who can, it needs to be at the top of the list. That said, let's look at the dietary shifts first and foremost. Now, we're going to be talking about, glucose and that kind of stuff and why that's important. So you might be wondering, what does that have to do with adrenal health? The most simple way to explain that is that when our body's stressed, it's in fight or flight mode all the time, it's producing cortisol. And when I said, like I said, when our body's continuously producing cortisol, this is where it starts depleting our body of the DHEA hormone. Cortisol is basically a fat storage hormone. It stimulates the production of insulin. because it actually causes a glucose spike. So you can eat nothing and you can still have a glucose spike if you're stressed. And I have a little picture showing that I experienced as I was monitoring my own glucose and saw that from stress. My glucose went up from stress. I hadn't eaten anything. And so this is again why we don't want to do fasting, because we basically have already been stressing our body to the point where it needs more steady glucose support. And so this is also a reason why we really, if we're going to support our adrenals, we really need to watch for any glucose spikes that would be caused by food, which includes fruits, some of the more high glycemic fruits like mangoes and grapes and bananas and things like that. I tested peaches, for instance, with myself, along with some organic grass-fed cottage cheese, and it did fabulous. Again, everybody's body's going to be different, but like, for instance, mangoes are pretty much horrible, like for any tired body's glucose, especially. So, and like I said, everybody's different. So there might be people who get sleep every night and they're feeling great and they don't have the cortisol raises and things like that, and they might handle other fruits and things like that and carbs and stuff just so different and so fine. I know for me and a lot of people, when their bodies are tired, we can't handle caffeine. It does cause a glucose spike for some of us in that situation. And so because it's stimulating the production of adrenaline from our adrenal glands, which raises cortisol, which says to the body, okay, this is glucose, which then says to the body, let's produce insulin to bring the glucose down. And so that whole process is just a stress on the body so much when it's already stressed out. So that's why we really need to eliminate caffeine as we're working to heal adrenals and support adrenal health. The irony is that as I've walked a lot of people through this over the years, I've had so many people say, but I need caffeine, but it becomes this vicious cycle. And so once you get off of caffeine and we do some of the vitamins and the supplements that I'm going to be talking about, you're going to realize that you don't need the caffeine and you don't have to experience the crash in order to just have some energy. We can get that naturally. So if you're concerned about that, there is a better way for you to get energy naturally as your adrenals are recovering and things like that. So I talked about how we can get some of the benefits similar to fasting by just having a really steady glucose. For instance, one time as I was monitoring my glucose, it said, you basically achieved a level of glucose steadiness that is what people get when they're fasting. But I wasn't fasting. What I was doing was I was really reducing carbs, sugars, no grains, no refined sugars, no honey, no maple syrup, none of that kind of spiky stuff. And I was increasing my protein. And I was making sure that I was pairing carbs with protein and a little bit of fat. And I achieved a glucose that looked like I had been fasting, but I wasn't. And so if we can get the benefits of it, but we need to have that protein very often when it comes to adrenals being tired, because as I said, sometimes when our adrenals are stressed, we tend to have hypoglycemia, which is low blood sugar. And that makes you, like, if you've ever experienced the feeling of what your hands are shaking, or you kind of feel like lightheaded or something like that, that's usually low glucose. A lot of times for those of us with adrenals that need some extra support, we experience it in the middle of the night, and then we might like wake up with a headache or just feeling that after you've been, feeling shaky for a long time and things like that. So protein is going to be our hero when it comes to that kind of stuff. And we'll talk a little bit more about that too. Again, we're not looking to fast to stress our body further at this point. So we need to make sure that we're going to eat within an hour of waking. For me, this is hard sometimes. There's a million things going on when I'm waking up. So that is important for me to have something that I can grab that's protein and make sure it's not carby. And because like I said, in the morning, our cortisol levels are the highest naturally, and this is how it's supposed to be. And then they gradually taper down throughout the day. And so we've already got that cortisol high, which is going to stimulate our body to have glucose and then have to make insulin to handle that. And so we don't want to stress that out further by having carbs in the morning. So, that's the best meal to have the lowest, excuse me, the lowest amount of carbs and just focus on the protein. For me, I like to use like a protein powder and in some almond milk or something like that to start the day if I have to get going as something else, or if I can't have breakfast for another half an hour after it's already been an hour that I've been awake. And so I will just drink that and then make sure that I can fit in some more good protein packed breakfast items and stuff. Fermented foods with meals. What stress does is it basically lowers and eventually shuts down the stomach acid that we need to digest foods. And so for me, for instance, many years ago, I think it was probably 8 or 9 years ago, maybe longer, I don't remember, I had an issue where I would get horrible stomach pains and sweating and just this instant reaction that felt horrible whenever I would eat avocados or bananas. And it was just so painful. And it was like all of a sudden I was extremely hot and I was sweating. And so what I learned was during that time of my life when I was extremely stressed, my stomach acid levels were insufficient. They had been shut down and I didn't have enough to handle the foods like that, especially. So when I started incorporating fermented foods, that eventually went away, and it didn't take too long, because fermented foods help our body to, it helps support our body's ideal stomach acid levels. And so, especially when stress is a factor, we want to make sure to support that. And there's other reasons too, obviously, all the good probiotics and things like that. And then we're just going to talk a little bit about how we need to make sure that we're not drinking a bunch of water with our meals and rehydrating between. But we're going to talk also about why rehydrating doesn't just mean drinking a bunch of water. Because again, the adrenal glands are responsible for maintaining electrolyte balance in our body. And if we're not rehydrating with electrolytes, with minerals, we're not really doing anything. We're not really getting what our body needs to be rehydrated. So I told you that I would talk a little bit more about making sure that we get adequate protein to allow our adrenals to really recover and things like that. One of the things to know is that when you eat carbohydrates of any kind, basically, it's a very quick up spike in the glucose and then a very quick drop. Generally, it's a quick drop. Protein is a very more gradual rise in glucose and then a very gradual downhill. And so this gets closer to that level glucose that we want. And so again, we need to have support for. Sometimes what happens is when we eat carbs, when our adrenals are tired and we've been having to produce a bunch of glucose and thus insulin for a stressed body, is that we get what's called reactive hypoglycemia, where we eat carbs, we go up, and then what goes up must come down. And when it comes down harder. And so that can cause a reactive hypoglycemia. So it can be a high blood sugar, and then you notice you start feeling tired and just like, oh, you get that like carb coma feeling, and then you crash. And then when you crash, it's a hypoglycemia that's caused by the high carbs. And then you get the feeling of hunger and cravings. And so then you craves carbs, and then that cycle goes up and it goes down. And so the more protein we can replace for those carbs, the more steady we can have, the less reactive hypoglycemias, the less cravings, the less fatigue and things like that. So how do you know if you're getting enough protein? Well, if you're having a couple of these or more that are on this, you're likely having a very, very low or an inadequate protein intake. And so just sometimes people are like, but I've increased. but it might not be enough. So just watch for these signs: shortness of breath. If you ever feel like can't get a high enough, deep enough breath, that could be a sign of inadequate protein intake. Low muscle tone. What will happen sometimes is, as people are working to heal, they're thinking that they're healing when they're losing weight. But sometimes with adrenal issues, we're actually losing muscle tone, weight. And so weight loss isn't always a good thing with this. We want to make sure that we're getting muscle tone building as we're healing too. And like I said, it's connected to thyroid. So one of the things is, if we're feeling tired all the time and then all of a sudden we're having, some symptoms of thyroid disease or thyroid being off, that's usually a sign that our adrenals are needing some support and some extra protein. A lowered immune system, again, we talked about that, and then weight loss of muscle instead of fat. So continuous glucose monitoring is something I mentioned, and maybe you've seen me talk about it on our Facebook page and things like that. And this is, let me just make sure I'm covering this right. One of the things that I found really interesting as I was considering going this route with my journey and learning more about this was studies show that people who check their blood sugar levels on a regular basis tend to have higher rates of weight loss. But it was more than just weight loss. And so again, it's more overall metabolic health, and our metabolic health, that's our metabolism, our immune system, our energy, all of those kinds of things, our heart health. And those are all linked to our glucose and what our glucose is doing throughout the day. And the reason for this and how much of an impact it has on people is because when you eat something and you see the impact that it has on your glucose, and you're like, wow, I spiked from that, and now I feel that carb coma. And so that's why I feel like that. And I thought that was healthy. I had so many foods as I've been doing this that pop up, and I'm thinking, I really thought that was healthy. And not to say that it's not healthy, but if we're having glucose spikes that are significant or they're lasting, it's something we definitely need to reconsider for our body personally. So somebody could, like I said, they could eat something that's not healthy. They could eat cheese all day long, and it might give them a stable glucose, but it doesn't mean that it's healthy. That said, when you see the impact that meals are having on you, when you see the impact that stress is having on you, when you see the impact that a lack of sleep is having on you, you can start to taper it. That's what I've done with this journey. So I would wake up and in the morning after a horrible night's sleep, and I would see that I started out with a fasting glucose higher than what I want it to be, what's ideal parameters. And so then I go about my day figuring out what's helping me get back to where I need to be with this. And how did that breakfast affect me for the entire day? Because your breakfast really does set the stage for your entire day. If you start out the morning with a high carb breakfast and your cortisol's already high in the morning and your glucose is high in the morning, and it sets the stage for a roller coaster all day long, because then you're going to have that drop, and then you're going to have cravings, and then you're going to need some caffeine or some carbs or something to get you back up. And it just really sets the pace for the whole entire day. And so what I learned on this journey was that only 12, it's actually 12% of Americans are metabolically healthy. And so whenever we're talking about anything dealing with hormones, energy, adrenals, immune system, it really has so much to do with this. So there are, unfortunately, the glucose monitoring systems. They're just a thing that goes onto your arm. They are prescription only in the US, but there are different programs that I've shared on my page and in my newsletters through Levels and Nutrisense that you can have basically an online health consult, and then they can prescribe you one. And there are extended periods of time that you can subscribe to these and get them every month, which is what I do just because I love learning and bringing you guys what I learn. But even just 2 weeks or a month of seeing this will completely change how you look at a day or 2 or 3 of skipping exercise, or not prioritizing sleep when you could be, or making an exception and splurging on those potato chips, and just how it is affecting your body. And so it's really fascinating. But anyway, so there's levels is quite hard to get through right now. The last I checked, they have a waiting list of about 100,000 people. NutriSense is, they are available right now. There's different ways you can do that. I have a 25% off coupon. So if you want that, let me know. I told you how how stress impacts our glucose, and because of the production of cortisol, and then the production of glucose, and then the insulin that our body has to make to recover from that. This is one example I took that you can see this spike. So you can see at the beginning of the chart how it was really nice and steady. That was because I was sleeping. It was in the middle of the night. And I think it was about 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning where you can see it start to climb pretty rapidly. Mama was upset. It was like, Lord, this woman just needs one good night of sleep. And now this happens. I don't remember what it was. It was something very stressful that decided I did not need to sleep in that moment. And I let it get to me. And so then I watched my glucose climb. Now it didn't climb even over 100. So I may be being a little bit dramatic, but with how much I've learned, I started doing some of the techniques and the things that I've learned, because I saw, wow, I need to get this under control before it really climbs. And because every time it climbs, that means inflammation, that means oxidation in the body, it means aging, it means stress, all of those things that are going to prevent us from really recovering our adrenal health or any area of health. So I was able to implement some of the things that I learned and we're talking about tonight and get the back down, but it definitely does. So if we're having unchecked responses to stressful things, stressors, or whatever it is all day long, you could imagine just the ups and downs that that might cause in our glucose and how we feel. One of the challenging things, and one of the main reasons why I wanted to start on continuous glucose monitoring, was because I knew that I needed to get back to exercising the way that I used to. But I found that I wasn't able to tolerate it very much, because I was to the point where my body was not handling cortisol from exercise very well, because certain types of exercise are going to raise our cortisol by causing our body to produce adrenaline, which it should. For some exercises, we need adrenaline. We need that to pump glucose through our muscles, and that's how we get our strength. But if we've gotten to a certain point in our adrenal fatigue or whatever that might be, we might find that we can't handle that cortisol adrenaline raise from certain types of exercise anymore without it causing a headache or muscle fatigue for 4 days or something like that, or just being really tired for a while after that. So I set out to make sure that I could figure out, how do we navigate that? Because as I'm monitoring my own glucose and my own health with other things, we absolutely need to prioritize exercise. Maybe not in the way that you might automatically think of exercise, but we absolutely need to prioritize it. We need to make sure that we are getting 30 minutes or more a day of exercise, of active movement. But we've got to balance that so that it's not putting further stress on our body and preventing our adrenals from becoming what we need them to be for energy and vitality. So when I set out, I was finding different ways and different things that would help, but wouldn't. So I've got my Apple Watch on. I've got rosemary oil on my wrist to prevent the EMFs, to help with all that. So we're good there. And then I've got the glucose monitor on, and I'm monitoring all of these things at the same time so that I can see what is good for my body, and it's not going to, really set me back in my adrenal recovery journey. Low and slow is a great way to start out. And so if you're like, well, hearing me say 30 minutes of active movement a day, 6 days a week, I'm not saying go do HIIT workouts. Absolutely do not go do HIIT workouts. I'm not saying prepare for a 5K. And we really Um, cardio isn't necessarily what we want either. We don't want high heart rate cardio. So one of the things as you're thinking about what you can do to support your body, to support your health, but not exacerbate any adrenal issues, is to watch your heart rate. Uh, like I said, if you're gonna, if you know you're like concerned about the EMFs from an Apple Watch, I personally apply rosemary oil on my wrist before putting it on because there's some great research on that helping with EMF, combating EMFs. And so I put that on and I'm wearing my watch and I'm watching my heart rate. Um, there's a point that's different for everybody based on your age and your weight, but generally for us women, especially that are a little bit older, maybe even older than me, we might need to make sure that we're keeping our heart rate generally under 150 as we're working to support our adrenals. So if it gets up to 160 because there was a little bit of a climb on that walk you were taking or that gentle bike ride that you were taking, it's totally fine. But overall, generally it's about 150 beats per minute that we want to kind of max things out on as far as what we're doing for the full 30 minutes, 6 days a week. So that's just something to keep in mind that might help you recover things faster without exacerbating any fatigue. And 30 minutes or less at a time. It's even, there's actually some research showing that you could do 10 minutes 3 times a day, and it's just as beneficial, if not more beneficial. So if you're like, I really don't have a half an hour a day, you have 10 minutes after you eat a meal. After every meal, 10 minutes, can you go for a walk? If you can, that's fabulous. What I did was when I'm watching glucose and I'm finding that on the nights where I had poor sleep, I actually had a better glucose and steadier, feeling steadier in my energy levels when I exercised still on those days. I used to think that if I exercised on days where I didn't get sleep, I would further you just increase my fatigue, increase how tired I was feeling. But it actually had the opposite effect. It actually helped support energy, support a more stable glucose on those nights where I didn't have sleep or a good enough amount of sleep anyway. So, but again, we need to support our adrenals by making sure that we're supplementing with the electrolytes. Those are sodium, potassium, calcium, magnesium. I'm not a huge fan of supplementing much for calcium. We just need a little bit to balance those electrolytes. And I'll share with you some of the things I use for that. But some of the things that people will do is the adrenal cocktail, which is orange juice and some of the minerals. Orange juice, especially if it's drank all by itself, it could just continue this inflammation and this glucose cycle that we don't want to get on because juices just have a spike in our glucose. So we look for other options for that as much as possible. Like I said, avoid high cardio, especially at first. And really just observe and assess for yourself, gauge how you're feeling after you do certain things. I know that a lot of people tell me when their adrenals are struggling, they will tell me that they feel horrible after exercise. They feel really tired. That's a sign that you've overexerted. That might be a great sign that you need to watch your heart rate and keep it under 150 for a while and see what you can do to support your body's exercise, your body's need for active movement without raising your heart rate, without worsening things. And what I personally found and what others have found is that a really good walk, keeping the heart rate under that, or a swim, or a gentle bike ride on a nice path around the lake, because it's soothing for our mind as well, really leaves us feeling energized instead of tired. So finding what works for you, observe and assess. If you want to take it up a notch after you've been doing something for a couple of weeks, do it, but then assess, how did it make you feel? If it made you feel worse, that's a great sign to just back off and go back to maybe the level you were at before. Diaphragmatic breathing is something I tended to overlook. I have a really good dear holistic practitioner friend who talked about it nonstop. And I was like, why does she keep talking about this? But it really hit home for me when I was in that moment of stress that I showed you, and I implemented diaphragmatic breathing, and you saw that it quickly lowered my glucose and got it stable again after stress. It is a powerful tool. It is easy. You can do it from anywhere, and it's free. So if you don't know how to do diaphragmatic breathing. I can show you right now. Some of you probably do, but basically what we're doing is we're switching our body from fight or flight mode, which some of us are in all the time without realizing it. And then we're going to switch it to rest and digest mode. And so you're going to breathe in through your nose and making sure that you are expanding your belly. Your belly should actually go out when you're breathing in through your nose. We're going to breathe in through our nose for a count of 4. We're going to hold it for 2, and then we're going to let out. Now, when you let it out through your mouth, see if you can let it out for like 6 to 8 seconds, even though we only took in for 4 seconds. When you're first starting out, you might find that that's difficult. You might also find that you're dizzy, which is normal, but it just shows how much we are living in this fight or flight mode, in this shallow breathing mode. And so you can breathe in your nose, make sure your belly expands, hold it for 2 seconds, and then breathe out while your belly goes in through your mouth. Okay, and so take 4, make sure that comes out 6, 7, 8 seconds as you're breathing out to fully exhale. Do that 3 times when you're in a moment of stress or when you're waking up. I find it's very helpful when I'm waking up and like, this kid's doing this and this kid's doing this and there's this going on. I got to get up to do this with the animals and I got to get up and make this for the kids and stuff like that. Take a moment, because sometimes you might find that you get out of bed, you're feeling fine, then all of a sudden you're starting to like, why am I so tired all of a sudden? That might be a sign to just really work on lowering the cortisol, the body's response to it, with some diaphragmatic breathing. I've got a couple more things. Essential nutrients and plant support. I'm not one to tell people to jump on 5 million supplements, even though I take a ton of supplements every single day and I find a ton of value in them. I really like to simplify it for people. One of the reasons that I really didn't step into the naturopathy field is because so many of them are really just, telling their patients that they need to spend $300 on all these supplements and these, and maybe they're not really the right ones or whatever. So I really wanted to target in on some top ones to prioritize. There are a few on here that I will not go a day without. There are some that I take here and there as my body is stressed and as it's not, and whatever. So B vitamins are one of the most important things. B vitamins are where you're going to get your natural energy from. And that is one of the most essential things needed for really helping the adrenals recover. There are some studies about how some of the different B vitamins actually help the body to not overproduce cortisol and things like that. And again, like I said, it's a really great source of instant energy. So I've had people, even like my 21-year-old son, who was doing caffeine for energy and for work and things like that. And I encouraged him to switch it out with our B vitamin complex. And he was blown away with how much he didn't need the caffeine anymore and how much he was able to have natural energy without the crash. And so if you are like, I need to start feeling more energy right now, you've got to go straight to the B vitamins and have a really good B vitamin complex, which I'll talk about in a minute. Minerals are absolutely essential. There are so many different complex functions in the body that absolutely depend on the minerals. And these are going to also potentially include some of the electrolytes that we talked about, like sodium and potassium and things like that. Magnesium is absolutely key for adrenal recovery, because every single moment that we're in stress, we're depleting our body of magnesium, which is why stress migraines come on, because the body has basically been sucked dry of magnesium. Magnesium is our relaxing hormone, or a relaxant is like a natural relaxant for our muscles, for our mind, for our heart, all those kinds of things. So a good magnesium is absolutely essential. I do not go a single day without my mineral supplement. And vitamin C is really fascinating. You may have heard me talk about the adrenal glands are the most concentrated source of vitamin C in the body. So there were indigenous tribes in Alaska who were unable to have fresh foods that would provide what we know now as vitamin C. And so they were having what we know now as scurvy. They discovered that if they ate the raw adrenal glands of a moose, that they could prevent scurvy in the wintertime when the fresh vegetables and things like that were not available. Because again, like I said, the adrenal glands are the largest concentrated source of vitamin C in the body, and they need vitamin C in order to continue doing what they need to do. And I had something that I was going to share that talked about vitamin C, but I don't know where I put that. So I just can't stress enough the importance of vitamin C. Vitamin C was shown to lower cortisol in patients and children in stressful situations. The amount shown to lower cortisols were 1,000 milligrams 3 times a day for a total of at least 3,000 milligrams a day. When I was in that most stressful time where, like I said, I had some stomach acid issues and things like that because of the stress, I had started taking 6,000 milligrams of vitamin C a day and noticed instant energy in myself by doing that as well. So if you want some instant energy, you don't want to take it all at one time because it might cause loose bowels. And so that's why we do it in divided doses throughout the day, 1,000 or 2,000 milligrams at a time. I would just, I've always just put vitamin C powder in my water. Like if I'm going to drink this amount the whole day, I would put the whole day's worth of vitamin C in there with some stevia sweetened vitality drops, and then just drink that all day long. Vitamin D is actually amazing for improving insulin sensitivity. The less insulin we can get our bodies to produce, whether it's from food or stress or any of those kinds of things, the better. Because again, insulin is a fat storage hormone, and that's going to cause us to store toxins and hormones that we don't want to store, that are going to, because those are the ones that are going to inhibit recovering our adrenal health. But there's so many studies on vitamin D, lowering fasting glucose, reducing the risk of diabetes, because when we are having these constant glucose spikes from cortisol and adrenaline and things like that, eventually our body's not going to be as sensitive to insulin as it should be. That's one of the reasons why active movement works so well. And then vitamin D also. Levels should be tested and optimized. We want to see them be at least 50. 50 to 80 is a super good range, and that's what we always aim for. Most people, I can count on one hand from all of the hundreds of tests that I've reviewed, the lab tests in people, I can count on one hand the amount of people who have had it in that level. And they were the people that were very intentional about it, that they were testing and they were supplementing an amount that they needed based on their testing. There are so many people who assume that they're getting enough from the sun, they're getting enough from this, they're getting enough from that. And we found that that's just not the case. The only person that I've ever had that was getting enough from the sun was someone whose lab test I had looked over that lived in the Middle East. So there's that. So just really test. Again, we have a home lab test on our website that you can test that with too. That's how we test it twice a year. The best times to test it are actually like right before winter, November or something, because our stores of it from the summer tend to be depleted by then, or as much as they're going to be depleted. And then again, 6 months later. So that's generally when we test that and optimize. So we're going to talk about a couple of these other things. The minerals, we're going to talk about the electrolytes. I said I'm going to pick 4 oils, essential oils with the most research behind them, and share just those, because like I said, I wanted to make it easy. These are the ones that I use the most often. Rosemary is great, not just for helping protect against EMFs, but very much calming the mind. I made some roller bottles for people who have said, I'm really feeling anxious a lot. How do I help with that? And I've made them roller bottles with rosemary, and they absolutely loved it. Clary sage is another one. Clary sage and frankincense. We have some vitality oils that we drop underneath our tongue, and those will help instantly in a moment of stress. And then nutmeg oil is another one I want to talk about in a minute here. And then we're going to talk about some herbs. If you have gone through a bunch of books, and one of them is The Hormone Cure, and ashwagandha and relora, which is a combination of 2 herbs, are the ones that get the most attention when it comes to adrenal support, hormone support, DHEA support, and things like that. You can take a picture or whatever of this QR code, and it'll show you my top 3 picks from Young Living. These I do not ever be without. These have been absolutely crucial. And what I did was I took this list right here that you'll see, which seems like kind of a long list, and I managed to combine it into these 3 and these 2. And there's a little bit of overlap in some of them. But I was like, where can we get all of these oils and some of these nutrients? And I plugged them into just a few things, because if we're going to have to take 20 things a day, it's probably not going to be sustainable for most of us. So mineral essence is the absolutely crucial mineral formula that I will not go a single day without. I will not leave the house without. If it's not too hot in my vehicle, I will leave a bottle in there, just because sometimes in a moment of stress, I will dose with it to make sure that my body's supported in the cortisol moment and things like that. Super B, we are combining those B vitamins that we talked about with the nutmeg oil that we talked about, which acts like an adaptogenic herb for the adrenal glands. And so it's a really powerful oil herb that is able to really support adrenal health and energy. And you'll notice a difference in energy. I actually take 4 a day, which is part of my adrenal recovery program, and 2 in the morning, 2 at night. Some people are like, I heard that you're not supposed to take super B or any B vitamins at night. I personally have found that it helps me wake up feeling very much more refreshed. But again, everybody's different, so you've got to find out what works for you. And then I definitely recommend reading up on cortisol. This is one that I will make sure I do not take it every single day. I did for a period of time. And then I will pop it when I'm going to be in a situation where my body's going to be producing extra cortisol. Like I started Taekwondo, and I'm seeing how that's going to work with, and how far, if I've gotten far enough in my adrenal recovery program to be able to handle that. But I take cortisol before, which helps combat the cortisol effects on my body from that high intense activity. So just something I definitely recommend looking into. And then these are some things that I also find very helpful. We talked about those ashwagandha and relora herbs. I set out to find how I could get those after I was reading about them in this book. I was like, where can I get those? How can I get those? And I found that the manufacturer of my supplements that I have on my website actually put them together in a product for me, and we have them there. So I started my journey by taking 1 in the morning and 2 at night, which was kind of what she recommended, this doctor recommended in this book. And then I will still generally take 2 at night, but sometimes it's not like I have to take it every single day now, because I had for so many weeks to really jumpstart my adrenal health and recovery. And then we talked about the electrolytes in the body. So this is where the adrenal cocktail comes in. This is especially important when you're sweating because you're losing more of those electrolytes and those minerals that you need to replenish if your adrenals are tired and not maintaining the electrolyte balance yourself, or if you're if you're experiencing morning headaches, that could be a sign that you're having hypoglycemia in the middle of the night. And I found this to be extremely helpful for that too. I shared that a while back, and I've had a ton of really great testimonies from people saying, I used to get morning headaches too. I started taking the adrenal cocktail at night and I haven't anymore. That's been my story. That's been other people's story too. So that's also something to consider sometimes. The key thing here is the sodium, which you won't necessarily find in other just natural electrolyte blends, but also the balance of the sodium with the potassium, the magnesium, calcium. Again, when we're under stress a lot, this doesn't have the amount of magnesium to replenish what the stress has depleted. And so that's where the mineral essence back here comes into play too. Make sure I'm almost at the end. So one of the things that I found super interesting is the effects of some of the most common toxins in home and body care products and how they affect our endocrine system. So you might know that some of these ingredients like synthetic fragrances and parabens are what we call endocrine disruptors. And so that triad that we're talking about, the adrenal, thyroid, and the sex reproductive hormones and things like that, they are all connected, and this is part of the endocrine system. And these toxins that are in most homes are endocrine disruptors. So they're disrupting a healthy triad of those systems. There's actually research that just by inhaling synthetic fragrances can induce insulin resistance, which may contribute to type 2 diabetes and other metabolic issues like adrenal fatigue. So we talked about how some of the problem with adrenal fatigue is just our body's not regulating our glucose properly. We're more sensitive to carbs when we don't get enough sleep. When we're under stress, we've got glucose spikes, all these different things that are going up and down with our glucose, causing inflammation and exacerbating our adrenal health. And so we really need to make sure that we are allowing our body to be sensitive to the insulin our body is producing so that it can produce the lowest amount possible. So I said part of that is exercising, active movement, and part of that is making sure that we don't have those synthetic fragrances in our home, which who would have thought that just by inhaling them can mess up your hormones and your adrenal health. So just making sure you're watching the products, even some of the really common ones that are like natural still have synthetic fragrance in them. So if it says fragrance on the ingredients list, or perfume, or any kind of parabens, methyl paraben, propylparaben, and then if it just says no ingredients, then we definitely want to avoid it. If there are no ingredients listed on it, it's bad. So really working on detoxing those things in the home will go far too, in making sure our adrenals are able to give us the best energy and vitality. So that's the basic Adrenal Health 101 that I have for you. Maybe it wasn't basic enough for you. So again, I want to encourage you to make sure that you can go back and pick maybe 2 things that you're going to implement this month. If you have any questions, here's my information. Make sure you're subscribed to my email newsletter, because we are just going to be continuing to cover this. And then also keep watching my Facebook page or my Instagram or my email newsletters, because I've got something that I'm working on to make sure we can follow this up for this, or for those who have so many other issues having to deal with metabolic health, PCOS, or infertility, or or type 2 diabetes, or gestational diabetes, or just wanting to have the best health possible. I'm looking to figure out how we can create a platform to connect with our glucose experiences. Hey, what did you find that helped when you were under stress? What did you find that helped for breakfast when something hadn't worked for you? Or what did you find about that breakfast? Was it horrible for you? And so obviously the main contributors to this are going to be people who have glucose monitors and can give us some actual data to share and help us. Maybe this, is for people who are not able to have a glucose monitor, and watch how that's going to go for them, but glean that information from other people. Even though everybody is different, we can still learn from each other's experiences and things like that. And so, for instance, like I've noticed taking certain vitamins like cortisol when I woke up one morning, knowing that my body was going to be running higher on cortisol because of a lack of sleep. And I could see on my glucose monitor, wow, look at that, really had an impact. And it helped me get back to baseline where I need to be with my glucose, as compared to the other day when I had that kind of sleep and I didn't take that in the morning. And so just some testimonies and experiences that we can share with that. So that's in the works. I'm really excited to share it with you. I have had so many messages from people like, guess what I just found out from this with my glucose, or guess what I found out from this. And I just want to have a place where we can put that all together and learn with each other and things like that. So hopefully that'll help you on your journey too. It's such a big part of all this that we really want to spend more time on it. But again, pick a couple of things that you can work on better on this. And just really start listening to your body. If your body's screaming at you from something you ate and you've gotten a carb coma, I think for a lot of us, not knowing the impact that it's having on our continued health, we're like, it's just a carb coma, I'll take a nap. But it's like, it's a carb coma, and that means inflammation, oxidation, adrenals are being further stressed. Like, how can we work on making sure that we don't keep doing that all of the time? And I know sometimes it's hard to distinguish a carb coma from just being so tired all of the time. But some of these things, just implementing a couple of them, most people absolutely see a difference quickly. And that's my goal, is just getting results without making it complicated, without saying you have to do 5,000 things, without saying you have to have a perfect diet or any of those kinds of things. So if you'll stick around on my Facebook page and my email newsletter, we'll keep talking about that. And again, your questions are really helpful. So, email me. I don't monitor my questions on my Facebook page because it just got to be extremely overwhelming. And so if you have any questions, I would love for you to email me them, because I learn from your questions, and I learn what's going on with other people and things like that. And so I'll make sure to get you that. Yeah, if you want the link for the glucose monitor, I'll get that too. And I'll get that to you. And then I'll probably put it in the next email newsletter also, just to follow up, make sure it's easily accessible. But anyway, stay tuned. I hope that helps you guys. Let's see here. Excellent. I'm so glad to hear it was helpful. Thanks, you guys. I'm going to stop the recording, and then let's see here. So that's